For the effects in the film, we wanted a comfort level of working with people that we'd worked with before. So we immediately wanted to use Bob and Dennis Skotak.
Jim Cameron approached us. We were working at a visual effects company at the time, and we had worked together on some of the Roger Corman movies, which is where we first met, Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror. Jim was interested in the fact that we were artists. Both Dennis and I could draw storyboards or sketch out sets and work in that kind of organic way and develop the sequences as we went along. That was, I think, something that he was looking for, an ability to design things so he could hand off sequences, give us an idea what he wanted, and we could develop it further, go to him for approval, and then we could shoot it. Prior to going to England, we had a need to shoot some of the derelict sequences for process plates. So it turned out that a friend of ours, Bob Burns, had a derelict ship from the original film, which was in really rough shape. I mean, it was cut in pieces, and the clay that was on the surface had fallen off. So we wound up refurbishing that model, repainting it, and building a miniature in the States, and we photographed that again before we left for England. As a matter of fact, I think we got the last of some of the still plates that we needed were shot on the very night, 3 a.m. I think we finished, 2 hours sleep, hopped on a plane and went to England.
At one point we had 2 full sound stages for the miniatures, and because you're now looking at a fairly vast area that encompassed the colony complex. That was a 5th scale miniature, so the buildings were about average, 5 to 8 feet tall, and it was about 30, 40 feet long. The atmosphere processing station was the sort of conical shaped structure, and I forgot, it's like 600 feet tall. It was some immense thing. Well, the miniature was about 6 feet tall. I think we had a 4-wall cyc, which is a cyclorama, with basically a painting of the planet, of this sort of ominous dark sky for the background, and this would be for the shots of the atmosphere processing station and for the colony complex. At the time, Pinewood Studios, way out in the back sort of open area, they'd had standing sets for all kinds of movies like Supergirl, but because the weather is so harsh there, it just destroys the sets, and pretty much they'll build a set and then they'll tear it down. But the tarmac is still there in the streets, and there was always sort of this eternal little fire out there where they were burning pieces of sets and so forth, and there's all kinds of junk out there. So Bob and I went out there one day with a wheelbarrow, and we just picked all this stuff up. And in the colony, a lot of the dressing that is in the colony complex is a lot of this debris that was out in this sort of junkyard of burning stuff. And it was great because it had been burnt and it had rusted and it looked really authentic. And we didn't have to make it. It was just right there. We could just bring it in. Jim's idea was that on one side of town were these modules that were flown in and set down. These were all the office buildings and what have you, where most of the action takes place in the movie. And the other side of the street was what we call the bad part of town. It was, like a bar and little restaurants and things that were set up. They were built, let's say, out of giant shipping containers, that once you empty these containers, you had a building. Back then, there were these huge rolling doors that had a lot of rust because it rains a lot in Britain, and the rust had a very specific look. So we were walking along, and Jim goes, "Oh, this rust is what I want on this thing." So I would take a picture of that. And we found a lot of reference actually at Pinewood, because at the time it was sort of, it was going to hell. And I could tell the model maker, "Well, just go outside." It was actually the door to the model shop that he had pointed to. So I said, "Well, here's the rust right here, just do this."
Weather played a key part in the atmosphere of Acheron, so when we had to have rain and wind and all of that happening, interacting, that adds a layer on top of everything else that really made it difficult to control We would do something, we would hopefully get it in the first try in one day, but fairly often, because of the nature of these things, it was not possible to do it. Now, none of this is earth-shatteringly difficult in and of itself, but the combinations together would just made it excruciatingly difficult at times.
The budget wasn't a huge budget by any means for that type of film at the time. Jim was going to use visual effects to extend sets and just give a larger scope to the picture in general. Using rear projection, using mirror shots, beam splitters, in-camera splits, foreground miniatures, you name it, anything that we could get away with in camera.
The reason for the miniature at the atmosphere processor, which was the Acton location, is there were limitations on what live-action art department could deliver, and Jim wanted to see this incrustation, the alien sort of cocoon extending up and intertwined on the ceiling, and it seemed to be the only way to do that was with a miniature. It could have been handled as an insert, say a character looks up and sees it, but we decided that we wanted to do it as a tilt down, actually, look up at it and then have the camera come down and see the actors in the shot. So the way that was created was the miniature, some of the miniature people went over to act in. We went over with a camera. We paced out where the miniature would go, and we figured out the size for it, and we took reference photos and built the miniature back at Pinewood Studios based on those measurements.
It pretty much had to be sculpted in place with a camera there, so the sculptors could see through the camera as they sculpted. This is the only way to do this type of shot. If this is the camera, the set's way back here. Right in front of the camera up here is a miniature that actually blends to the background. So because you're only looking through one little lens, a single lens, you don't have binocular vision, you have one eye. When you look through the lens, this foreground miniature would match up with the full-size set, 30 or 40 feet away.
As it turned out, that was shot on the very first day of principal photography, and it was one of the first shots up, if not the first shot. And so we knew that it would be looked at by people at 20th Century Fox. So we wanted to make a really terrific shot. And you could imagine my surprise after we had set this miniature up, and we had all the actors out there, and I think David Geiler was sitting on a ladder behind the set when Jim turned to me and said, "Well, it's your shot, you direct it." So I thought that was terrific. So I actually got to direct that shot in the film.
The actors that were in the foreground, their lights that were on their mounted on their shoulders were in fact interacting with the light across the top part of our miniature, and then had to blend to the bottom. So we had somebody off camera moving a light around in sync with their action. So all of those things worked out together, and frankly, it all worked.
Part of the shot started with James Remar right up in camera on this foreground miniature shot, and he turns away and walks away. So and now it's a different actor. Now it's Michael Biehn. And they had actually, because this had happened after we'd shot this, the miniature was trashed. It came back in a truck. It was styrofoam, it was delicate and so forth, and we thought we were all done, everybody was happy, and then Remar left. And Jim was saying, "Oh, we're going to have to reshoot this," and I was like, "Oh, putting this all back together," because it was just, it was very difficult to do this. So luckily he picked up the shot just as the other actor turned away. So it worked out, but it was, whoo.
A few weeks later, I guess this footage was being shot for Fox, and Gail Hurd was relating this anecdote. She was there, I guess, during the screening, and they looked at the footage, and they're saying, their reaction was, "Well, you're spending all this money on these gigantic sets, and there's no visual effects. Where are the visual effects?" And she kind of chuckled and said, "You saw the visual effects. That thing that you think is the art department spending a lot of money on the set is actually the effect shot." So we were real happy with that. It's nothing better than to fool a studio exec.